Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Damage Report. I am John Anarola, and you know what's not funny? The news. It's very serious, and so we've brought a serious co-host who I was hoping in the time that I was doing this intro would put down the camel, but here is Brett Erlich and his camel toes. There he goes.
John, I don't know if anyone heard this during our pre-show discussion because I'm pretty sure our mic is closed. See, first, but John told me that I can't like eat meat and cheese in the morning, but he's saying camel toe this early.
It was an Arrested Development reference. I was recently rewatching it, but anyway,
that's the only place that term exists. Right here, look at the two different colors of Lumpy. This is. It's not that Lumpy is sun bleached, it's that Lumpy is covered in dust.
Okay, well, I will gladly take that camel off your hands if that's what you need. But anyway, Brett, thank you for being here. I'm not as excited now after what just happened, but still, I think it'll be a good day. We've got a bunch of news for you. So if you're joining us, thank you for regardless of where you're at. It would be great though if you were to hit the like button and share the stream so that people know we're live. As always, I will remind you that while notifications exist, they are a fickle thing in the best of times. So helping us out by sharing the stream would be great. And over the course of the next 90 minutes, we're gonna be going through a couple different things. I'm very excited for a few. One is I have been, I think, pointing out for a couple weeks now that those who are speaking out against the vaccine are doing it very vaguely. They don't want to say anything specific. They don't want to ask any specific questions. And I have discovered a great example of why that is. So we will be getting to that in a little bit. I am also excited to show to you the worst sentence of the week. Maybe that'll become a recurring thing. We've got some hard data on the pandemic of the unvaccinated that people have been talking about. More analysis of how that's spreading, how bad it is, and we've got some visualizations for you. It is way worse than I thought it was. And then there's bad stuff for Kavanaugh, Trump conning his followers, and more stuff besides. And of course, as always, it being Friday, we are going to be choosing our garbage people of the week. There is still time though for you to go to the community tab on our YouTube channel and vote for the community garbage person of the week. So that is available for you. Excited to find out what that is. Brett, is there any other, I tried to come up with what the term is for camels and other related animals. Dromedaries, is that what they're called? Any dromedary related news or anything?
No, but there are tons of Bactrian updates, which are the same size, way hairier, and twice as many bumps.
I've never heard of this animal. I like it.
John, stop the presses.
What?
Right now on our Twitch channel.
What?
BC Trumpet gifted 5 subs 10 times.
I thought you misread it at first. BC Trumpet, thank you very much. That is crazy.
Subs. Wow.
Thank you. That is doing more work to grow the community today than either Brett or myself will do. So thank you, BC Trumpet. I do appreciate that. By the way, speaking of growing the community, we have sadly on our YouTube channel run right up against the limit, the hard cap on how many emojis we can have, because as of today, we now have both Ben Dixon and Rashad Ritchie emojis. For us to get another emoji, which is going to be our rainbow dragon, we need about 50 to 60 of them. So if you've been thinking about becoming a member on YouTube, today would be a great day to do that. Thank you to Mike Lenwell for becoming a member. Just did at tier 1 and gets us one person closer to that rainbow dragon emoji.
That's awesome.
Now that exactly, it's very nice. Now that said, Brett, are you ready to do some news?
Now I am.
Okay, good. Yeah,
I had to heave that news sigh. Do you do the news sigh, John? I feel like you probably do the news sigh. Just the this stuff.
I'm actually one of my quirks I've been told is that I sigh a lot. Actually, it's not a good thing. I need to get it under control.
No, but anyway, but people who know that when you sigh, it doesn't mean you're exasperated about what they just did.
Yes, it's just a more general thing. I'm in a fugue. Anyway, let's.
You have generalized anxiety.
No, it's not generalized right now, Brett. It's very specific and targeted. And it's against you. Now let's do this. Okay. Anyway, oh man, I love to have Brett back on the show in some ways. Okay, so let's do this. Wait, Overflow just became a member. It's here too. Thank you, Overflow.
Leave it up. Leave that B-roll up.
Closer. Look how happy Biden is that Overflow became a member. Oh, we've almost got the new emoji. Anyway, okay, with that, let's do this. Joe Biden would have you believe that he gets that a war on democracy is happening and he is going to be your ally in fighting against this Republican-led effort. In a fiery speech in Philadelphia last week, he warned that the GOP effort was the quote, most significant test of our democracy since the Civil War. But if you've been watching this show and you know my sarcasm tone, you know that this is not a positive thing about Joe Biden because unfortunately, while he's been giving a couple of good speeches, there's still a lot of reason to be concerned that he's not going to take it seriously and he's not going to do what's necessary to stop the Republicans from effectively taking away your vote. Voting rights advocates around the country fear that the Biden administration, currently focused on a bipartisan infrastructure deal and an ambitious spending proposal, has largely accepted the Republican restrictions on voting as baked in and is now dedicating more of its effort to juicing Democratic turnout. And to that end, they've been putting some pressure on him. We're gonna get to that in a second, this letter that went out. But I wanna show to you the worst sentence of the week. This is coming from the New York Times. In private calls with voting rights groups and civil rights leaders, White House officials and close allies of the president have expressed confidence that it is possible to, quote, out-organize voter suppression, according to multiple people familiar with the conversations. And I'm not mad at the New York Times on that. I'm mad at everyone else that made that sentence possible because that sucks so much. You're gonna out-organize it. Oh, I see, around the country, they're making it so people can't vote or it's as difficult as possible. They're specifically targeting certain populations. If you're a non-white voter, good luck in a lot of these states, but don't even worry about it. You guys can just organize around it. Brett, that blows so bad.
This is really gonna appeal to the Marie Kondo voter. The like, does this voter suppression spark joy? If not, organize around it. Nobody in their right, like this drips with stupid, like, everyone take your shoes off and keep your socks on and sit in a circle on the carpet. Let's brainstorm ideas for messaging in the Democratic Party. Like that's the BS. Like somebody, 4 people are tasked with this. None of them have met human beings besides each other before. And they're like, wouldn't that be great? We can out-organize voter suppression, run with that. Who is rah-rah, sis boom bah excited about that kind of messaging? The answer is no one.
No one, it's terrible. And look, some asked for comment afterwards say, well, that's just one of the things that we said. That's not like totally our message or whatever, but you're not doing anything. So I am gonna judge you by the things you say on these calls. And here is the thing about that sentence, the worst sentence of the week. It's not even that in all cases, it can't be true. I mean, after all, thanks to years of amazing organization and activism in Georgia, these 2 Senate seats were won. So that's true. But even in that case, it was such a narrow thing. And I'll remind you, it's more difficult to vote today than it was a year ago in Georgia. So unlikely that organizing would have prevailed with the current system. And much more importantly, the reason they do the suppression is to make it as difficult as possible. And so in many places, no, you're not gonna be able to out-organize it. But that's not even the worst thing. Even if it was true, even if that wasn't a horrible passing of the Democratic buck, wouldn't it be easier to win if you had the great organizing and you weren't suppressed? Why are you surrendering on something so goddamn fundamental? Something that you, again, in speeches pretend that you care about, but you're willing to throw to other people. Really easy to say you can out-organize it when you're not the person that's gonna have to be doing that. That you're not the person that has been doing that. Joe Biden wasn't on the ground 3 years ago in Georgia, whatever, laying that groundwork. He wasn't going to the churches every weekend trying to make sure that people were excited to vote. None of his aides were either. It wasn't them. So yes, no matter how bad Biden or the Republicans screw over these organizers, they're gonna keep trying as hard as they can. But shouldn't they be able to expect that the president they got elected would at least give them a bit of an assist along the way? It's just, it's so bad.
Another thing that is very important to mention about why this is such a dumb idea is that many of the best organization efforts around voting are explicitly themselves tactically targeted by these new voter restrictions.
Yeah.
So the thing where you send someone around and you get souls to the polls, all of that is directly under attack. All the tactics that have been developed as a result of voter suppression since the Civil War that he's talking about, these have the ones that have worked are being shot down explicitly due to these new laws that they're putting into effect in all these different states. And at the same time, bolstered by this horrible sentence, or bolstering this issue, is Biden and company not doing the things, organizing, I guess, legislatively to overcome these new voting laws, right? Like, there's a lot that they really need to do that they haven't done to fight that. And that's what's also frustrating. And I'm not saying, I don't even think they should, quote, get rid of the filibuster. I think they need to bring back the filibuster.
Yeah,
because right now the way that cloture works is no one's going to talk about anything unless you invoke cloture, you do a cloture vote. It has not, and then after that, people talk for hours and hours and hours and hours. I think you force them to talk for hours and hours, and then you have a vote. Period. That's it. That's how the original that's how like the second generation of filibuster was.
Yeah, and we're in like the fifth or whatever. And they've said that they support that. Even Manchin has said at times that he supports that and then forgets. Like, and it's just so insulting. Now, in response to what we would like them to do, the president and his advisors have repeatedly pointed out that he does not have the votes within his own party to pass federal voting legislation and does not have the power to unilaterally roll back the filibuster, even if he supported doing so. So, okay, good. So that's another excuse that you have. Okay, so let's respond to that. So there's two different parts of that. One is that they don't have the votes to pass the federal voting legislation, and the other is they don't have the votes to unilaterally roll back the filibuster. Okay, so to the first point that you don't have the votes to pass the federal voting rights legislation, whether it's the For the People Act or it's the Lewis Voting Act, then stop pretending that you're going to do that. If you've totally given up, Biden with Don Lemon this week was like, we're going to pass the John Lewis Voting Act. Well, then why are you saying you don't have the votes to actually pass it? Like, so it sounds like you're lying to us in public and then being a little bit more honest, if cowardly, in private. And I understand the fight will continue or whatever, but saying you don't have the power to unilaterally roll back the filibuster. Okay, no, I get that. You have to get some senators on board. Maybe do that. Maybe actually do that. You are, after all, the GD president. Why did you become the president? To just do what other Democrats will allow you to do? You just float free of this whole thing, untethered to anything, no responsibility, no power to influence whatever? Like, is he the ghost in the first half of the movie Ghost? Touch something. You're the president. Have an influence on this process, or at least try. If he spent the next year like setting Joe Manchin on fire rhetorically, and it failed, okay, that sucks. But at least it sucks because of Manchin, not because of you. Right now, it sucks because of Joe Biden, and he should at least be trying. Kyrsten Sinema is ripe for a primary, and whether she ever gets one, you better believe that she's at least worried about it. So Joe Biden, start talking about that. You don't have the votes, get the goddamn votes. This is how you do it. Donald Trump, he has his reign of terror or whatever, which I think is mostly unearned, that he uses via Twitter, or at least when he did, to get everything he wanted. I'm not asking you to do that, but I'm saying these core things that you have promised, you can use the tools that are available to you. You're acting as if you're not even familiar that they exist. Anyway, final thoughts, Brett.
Final thoughts on this are, when you invoke Donald Trump's name, how dare you shame? But when you do, you remind me that Donald Trump said a lot of stuff himself in his election campaigns and his constant campaigning ever since he originally took office. But the things that got passed are the things that people in his party's power structure cared about. Yeah. That's all. And you have to look at things that end up passing. And when you see those things, you yourself can determine what that party in power actually cared about. Yep. And the Democrats obviously don't care about this enough. They, in that eternal struggle that we put up there as potentially being like equal on both sides, but it's not. That struggle between, staying in power and campaigning to stay in power. The Democrats seem happy to just continue to campaign to stay in power and not actually pass legislation that if they really meant it, they could put in place. And that's what's so frustrating. And the additionally frustrating thing is the time is absolutely positively now. Now is when you need to do it, because with these additional voting restrictions, yes, you can absolutely organize to try to mitigate some of these effects of these voting laws. But if you do put in place something like a federal minimum for what constitutes, the right to vote, that would be far more successful in solidifying your own party's control for generations to come.
Yeah. We have this limited time. We have the highest stakes imaginable. Do it. Do something. Or if you are so annoyed at this leftist pressure, give us something else that you can actually give us via executive orders. But you're not doing any of it. Anyway, I'm gonna sigh, Brett, at the news. But for now, we're gonna take a first break. When we come back, we've got some COVID-related news. It's gonna be a little bit of fun and a little bit depressing. We've got that for you after this. Hey everybody, let's get back to the news. And I've actually been pretty excited for this one because it definitely confirms something I've been talking about throughout the week. So let's jump into this. There's been a persistent campaign in right-wing media against the vaccine, but generally it's not very specific. Sometimes in the independent circles it is, but on Fox News and on NewsMax, actually generally, the form that it comes in is we're not saying don't get the vaccine. We're not saying the vaccine will kill you. We're just doing a whole bunch of coverage that implies that there's something to be fearful about, something to be suspicious about. We're getting you to think about this less through a lens of public health and more about you being a patriot or whatever. And we have questions. That's the thing that always comes up. Tucker Carlson can't stop talking about the questions that he has. He never asks them, he just says that he has them. He's never specific. And that turns out to be a wise thing, because when you go specific in your opposition to the vaccine, you can look like even more of a doofus. And we have an example of that. Newsmax had a doctor on, Angelina Farella, and here is what she had to say about the vaccine.
No, you know how you fight a pandemic and how you fight disease? You treat it. Why don't we try treating early? Why don't we do that? This is the first time ever that we don't have guidelines. Where are the guidelines from Mayo Clinic? Where are the guidelines from Hopkins? Where are the guidelines from your esteemed place, Dr. Schaffner? Where are they? What are we supposed to do? Why are we not treating these patients? This is ridiculous, and it doesn't even have to be the controversial medication that is FDA approved for the last 50 or plus years. So we can treat this with albuterol, with budesonide, with prednisone, with azithromycin. We can use vitamin D, we can use zinc, we can use quercetin, we can use N-acetylcysteine. We can use all kinds of things to treat this virus. But you know what? There has been an absolute blackout on what primary care physicians can do to treat and get these patients well. That's how you crush a pandemic.
Okay, so there's a lot of nonsense there about vitamin D and zinc, and we will get to that. But she gave me what I've been asking for. I have been saying, just tell me what your questions are, and that kook asked some specific questions. So for instance, where are the guidelines from the Mayo Clinic? Well, here are the guidelines from the Mayo Clinic on coronavirus, how to diagnose it, how to treat it. It's all available on Google. I don't understand most of it. I'm not a doctor. I'm starting to question that she might not be either, but it is available freely. She said, where are the guidelines from Johns Hopkins? Well, here are the guidelines from Johns Hopkins. Again, it is a fundamental set of guidelines for the diagnosis and treating of coronavirus. She also said, Schaffner, who is a doctor who wants you to vaccinate, who was also on that Newsmax thing, she said, where's your places? Well, they do. She said, what should we treat people Dr. Schaffner, why aren't you responding to that? Well, Vanderbilt University, they have a section on their website about using monoclonal antibodies as a treatment for coronavirus. All of this, I'm not Ken Klippenstein. Nobody leaked this secretly to me. This is all on the internet. All of these places, and I'm sure the CDC and the WHO and all these other organizations have a bunch of information about how to diagnose it, about how to treat it. That's all available. And she is a doctor a year and a half into a pandemic that apparently didn't even Google if that stuff was available. So the question of why don't we have guidelines? No, we do actually. Why aren't we treating them? No, we are actually. What do you think is happening in these hospitals? These very specific questions are dumb as hell. And that is why people like Tucker Carlson, who are better at the grift, don't ask those questions. He will never allow himself to be pinned down with a question like, where's Johns Hopkins guidelines? Because they're out there. So he will just say, I have questions, whereas she opens herself up to look like a moron in that way.
Yeah, Also adding to this is the idea that they're bringing on, they found a doctor who will say what they want them to say.
Yeah.
And that's it. And that's one of those things that
saying
NewsMax does fantastic jobs about. Not only that, but they're not saying it. They're insulated from that. They learned their, legal liability issues by thanks to, people who make voting machines. And they're very young and they're figuring all this out, but they're also stumbling into other things that are utilized by other networks where they bring in something that is not hotly contested. Is it the subject they're talking about is not hotly contested, yet they trot in two doctors to present both sides of the issue. And they have, and to bring it to discuss issues, medical issues that disproportionately affect older individuals and folks with comorbidities. Did you see what her title was? She's a director of pediatrics.
Mm-hmm.
So they bring in, kids, doesn't affect kids as much, but they found someone to say that. Now, in terms of things that you can treat it with, I don't know. I don't know if there's a difference between what's on the website for the CDC in terms of their guidance on how to be treated for these things and the official guidance from the CDC to these doctors on how to treat it. But that doesn't mean that there aren't treatments for it and that people can't share medical information on how to treat people. But how is that part of this discussion? Yeah, and how is that part of this discussion from her and not get vaccinated? Yeah. And not like we have an emergency use authorization. That kind of information is already categorized as different from official FDA approval, but in this situation, it seems to be working.
Yeah.
And part of it is, I feel like she's focusing on lack of guidance in one specific way when everybody's in the trenches. All her colleagues are in the trenches dealing with this. And yeah, I'll take her, medical opinion under advisement, but I'm also going to take my doctor's medical opinion under advisement. Yeah. And all those things that I see on all those websites that you're showing, I assume I would trust when I talk to doctors about this who have themselves gotten vaccinated. I feel like that's most of the information I need to know. And also the people that are telling me that it's up to me whether I get vaccinated or not. I'm not seeing whether those folks are I'm not taking what they're telling me to do under advisement. I think what speaks volumes is when they're asked if they're vaccinated, they either say yes or I'm not gonna tell you. And I know for a fact that a lot of these folks are vaccinated. So those actions speak a lot louder than the words, especially when the words are motivated by some kind of monetary interest and some voting block interest to be lying to me.
Yeah. Yeah, and with her, I don't know. I don't know her. I don't know if she is vaccinated or whatever. I don't know to what extent she's being influenced by the fact that she's made a bit of a media career out of being one of the doctors who will say whatever crazy stuff you want about how you shouldn't get vaccinated. You should just take zinc or whatever. I do know that back in May, she was one of the doctors who testified before a Texas State Senate committee and said, we have in excess of 4,000 deaths and this vaccine has not been pulled yet, suggesting that the vaccine had killed 4,000 people at that point. But again, making unfounded, no evidence claims of thousands of people being killed doesn't stop you from being brought onto Newsmax. In fact, it might have been the thing that got her on their radar in the first place. So I don't know what her motivation is. But again, if you're gonna be making specific claims about like these organizations not having any guidance, it is on you to at the very least do some Googling or whatever.
And just so you know how it works. Go ahead, sorry.
And really fast, it seems a little bit odd to say that this doc is wrong, this other doctor was on there is wrong for wanting people to get vaccinated. Let's just treat it. It is very rarely the position of doctors that you should just freely get sicknesses, get diseases, and then we'll figure it out. That's not how we approach other things. And I'm nervous to ask, is that how we should have been dealing with polio and smallpox and all that? Because I can't guarantee that she wouldn't say yes at this point. But I think that seems absurd to most people, and it should be seen as just as absurd in this case.
Right.
Sorry, what were you saying?
Well, it's just so stupid that she's like, she's saying it as though the only thing you can do in any pandemic is medications after people get it. That's just totally not how any of those pandemics explicitly have gotten eradicated, if they've gotten eradicated. Like, it's through vaccines. Like, I'm sorry, that's how it works. And then just in terms of how it works and how she gets booked, what happens is she has someone who is advocating on her behalf. She hires a PR firm, and that PR firm blasts out to everyone with like a headline. Like, I get these emails. I don't know how I got on these email lists, but I get the emails that are like, doctor to tell reasons vaccine doesn't work. And then it's just a blurb, and you get them from the same people all day long. And very lazy bookers just go, oh, thank God there's someone, I'll just go to them.
Yeah.
They have them on, that's it.
Yeah, and the thing about those emails is you can't unsubscribe from whatever's causing it. You can only unsubscribe from each individual a-hole. I hate it. Anyway. Okay, well, look, we like facts here, or at least we want you to believe that. So we're gonna go into some of those in just a second. We're being told that we are in a pandemic of the unvaccinated, but how bad is it? Well, if you've been watching the news, you know it's not great. In LA County, for instance, yesterday we had more than 2,750 cases. That is about 250 more, about 10% more than we had the day before. So that's not good. And overall cases are indeed rising across the country. So if you look at a chart going back basically to the beginning of this year of the overall case count, I know that you probably can't read the specific numbers there, but it is starting to inch up after falling precipitously earlier this year. Hopefully that is a good enough description for the podcast. So that's not great, but more importantly, that's the country at large. We know that not every state is being hit to the same extent. So one of the worst hit, I wanna show you how Missouri looks. So if you look at the chart for Missouri, you see it, and you can see the national numbers sort of grayed out there, but it had fallen. It had been steady with some spikes along the way, but it is now starting to march back up to where it was at the beginning of this year, when we were starting to come down from that dark winter where the vaccine was starting to be spread. But here is the thing about those numbers. Those numbers are the population at large in that state, which includes some people who are unvaccinated and some people who are vaccinated. And so effectively, the fact that something like at least 40% of the population is vaccinated is, thanks to the power of the vaccine, artificially taking down numbers. Now that is perfectly valid data and important if you just want to get an idea of what it's like there. But if you want to get an idea of what it's like for the unvaccinated, that's not necessarily the best way to look at it. So the New York Times has done a visualization of the case rates among the unvaccinated population. And you can take a look at Missouri's numbers there, and they are now back to about where they were at the very beginning of the year, when we were in that dark winter and so many people were dying. Now, clearly, not as many people are dying because you can separate out the populations, but of course, what you're getting there is not a random sampling of people. Those unvaccinated people in Missouri are not randomly chosen from the population, and older people are far more vaccinated. So you do have higher cases. You don't necessarily have as many deaths as you would have expected with that case count earlier this year, but the cases are going up, and that does necessarily lead to more deaths. So I wanna show you another state, even larger population. Here is Florida. Again, those numbers focusing on those who are unvaccinated. You can see that we are back up to January 18th numbers, and just hoping that that's the peak, but there's no reason to believe that, unfortunately. And if you map out a bunch of these states, you can see Nevada here and Arkansas as well. Again, they are back up to the numbers they were at. Like Nevada is at January 29th. Arkansas is at February 1st. And again, the hospitalizations aren't necessarily quite as, that's actually the hospitalization numbers, I apologize. The death numbers aren't as high as they were at, but the hospitalization numbers among the unvaccinated are back up to about their worst point earlier this year. And those numbers aren't, those charts, I should say, aren't necessarily what you're gonna see every day. But if you're a person in certain parts of the country, your experience is gonna be very similar to what it was like in many parts of the country during the dark winter. Brett, what are your thoughts about that?
What do you do with all this information? All this information says to me is get vaccinated. It just, and more information that comes in over time reinforces that. Period. That's all I can do with that information. And everyone else is playing some kind of weird, stupid game. It just shows me the thing that I was pretty sure of when I got vaccinated, which is if you're vaccinated, you will be more protected against the consequences of this virus than if you are not vaccinated. The mRNA vaccines seem to be performing very well in identifying the thing they told us to identify. It would work to identify is basically finding a lot viruses like this one and protecting you against it. And when variants come up, those variants are viruses like the original, and it protects you against it. And everybody else that's playing this game where it's like, well, you can still get breakthrough in infections after you've been vaccinated, ignore these other facts, which I again say that like it's still a deadly virus. Nothing is wildly safe. But by comparison, something is. By comparison, getting vaccinated will keep you from getting sicker. It will keep you from being hospitalized in a much greater extent. And the other thing is, as we hear from Rand Paul about this gain of function activity, not getting vaccinated is essentially turning everyone into a gain of function lab. Because we then, instead of putting it in some lab to change things about it to see if we can create a vaccine or whatever people use, gain of function or whatever Rand Paul's talking about that's not gain of function, whatever that is, we are just throwing billions of human test labs at this virus, and they are changing it into something else. So when we talk about how to deal with pandemics, you have to do the best thing. We all should definitely do the best thing. And right now it looks like the best thing to do, given that yes, this is a deadly virus, is to just get vaccinated.
Yep, 100% right. Yeah, and that's why we put it on the rundown. It's probably not gonna work. Let's keep it real. Everybody's trying to figure out the magical thing that will get people to not willingly walk to their death. And we've been trying for months. It is a disheartening thing to be having to watch, and also knowing that, as Brett pointed out, there are breakthrough cases. So the best you can do for yourself is to get vaccinated. But even then, you have a small chance, a much smaller chance that generally someone who is unvaccinated could get you sick. The odds of a vaccinated person infecting another vaccinated person are very, very small, obviously. But we are always going to be at least a little bit at risk as long as a significant percentage of our population refuses to do the right thing. Okay, with that, we're gonna take our second break. When we come back, new details on how Trump has conned his followers out of millions of dollars. That'll be fun after this. But let's jump into a couple more stories. In the immediate aftermath of the November election, Donald Trump needed your money so that he could stop the steal, so he could save the republic, so he could launch audits of the ballots, basically do whatever it takes to stop that commie Joe Biden from overthrowing democracy and stealing the election from him. You might have seen on, for instance, Facebook, things like, we need you to join the fight to secure our elections. If you're on his email list or if you get text messages from him, God help you, because they were coming multiple times per day. And all of them wanted your email address, but more importantly, they wanted your money. And so he had a political PAC, Save America PAC, designed to do this. You donate to it, he will stop Biden from stealing the election. Here's the issue though. It raised about $75 million in the first half of this year. But that said, it has not devoted any funds to help finance the ongoing ballot review in Arizona or to push for similar endeavors in other states, according to people familiar with the finances. So it's happening. It's been happening. They got cyber ninjas over there, but he's not involved. And he wants it to happen in other states, but he's not spending any money to do it, despite telling you over and over and over that that's what you would be funding. In the meantime, the months-long audit in Arizona, which is expected to cost millions of dollars, is being paid for primarily by nonprofit entities that do not disclose their donors and private individuals such as the former Overstock chief executive Patrick Byrne. A lawsuit seeking a similar audit in Fulton County, Georgia has been financed by small donations, according to the group that brought the claim. I mean, they raised $75 million in the first half of this year, Brett. It would be just a tiny percentage of that to pay for the entire thing in Georgia and Pennsylvania and wherever. You can go to Michigan, you can go all over the place. They could easily pay for it, but he's just not doing it, Brett. Why is that?
I'm gonna go out on a limb here. I'm gonna beautiful mind it. You can't see it, it's right off here. And I'm connecting the dots and everything. And it's a grift. It's always already
but for money
been a grift. For money, for popularity. He is in the grift business. This is on his expense report, not audits. His expense report is travel. His expense report is everything except the thing he's raising money for, because they're not donating to the Trump re-election campaign. They're not donating to the audit experience. They're donating to this idea, this prosperity gospel type idea of they're right and everyone else is wrong. And what's crazy, it feels so culty when you point out like what your money is going to. It's not to anything but just giving him a lot of money to keep doing stuff that makes him feel dope.
Yeah.
And it's consistent with his entire career. He's gone bust. He's taken advantage of the system to get out from under it. And then based on this BS idea of success that he's been able to brand himself as having, folks have come in because the brand's more valuable than anything else. It's exactly this like entrepreneurial nonsense spirit concept of value. It's like baseball cards, right? Like baseball cards are pieces of cardboard with stats on the back. But if you get enough people to believe it's valuable, then it's valuable. And that's exactly how Trump has been. And people keep giving him money and people keep bailing him out and using that concept of value. Like when he got his Apprentice show, they had to fake his level of success.
Yeah.
And then he got successful off that perceived value.
I like your baseball card analogy. I have a question for you in a moment that's gonna come off of that. But first I wanna give people just a few more details. So first of all, it is that obviously the journalists who are talking about this story have reached out to the Trump campaign to ask if they will be funding some of these audits, for instance. But a spokeswoman for Trump did not answer questions on whether the group is considering putting money into ballot review efforts. We will find out what they spent money on in the first half of this year after they publicly disclose their fundraising and spending by July 31st. So at some point, I'm sure we'll have Dave Leventhal on and we'll talk about it. We'll figure out what they were spending on. But so far, they won't even lie to you. Like they won't even lie and be like, oh no, we're totally gonna do it. Like they won't even do that at this point. But the cherry on top of the whole thing, the stuff about the 75 million, that's what, there's a million headlines today about the 75 million. And I get it, it's a lot of money, it's the bigger number, but that to me is not the most amazing part of this. It's buried like halfway through the Washington Post article, and it's what happened before that. So Trump launched the group right after the election, and it quickly raised $31.5 million last year. But he had spent little of its haul by January 1st, according to its disclosure period, public disclosure for that period. The reason I think that's so much more amazing, even though it's only about half as much money, is that after inauguration, they raised tons of money and they're not spending it. Okay, that's totally dishonest, but he's thinking ahead to 2024 or whatever. But the thing I just read you, that's before inauguration. He raised all that money to remain president and didn't even spend it. Like he didn't even spend it to stay in the White House. That feels to me like 10 times more dishonest. Like if you wanna throw him money now with Biden as president, God only knows where that money's gonna go. But they were terrified that he would ever leave the White House. And so they gave him money and he just hoarded it. He walked out of the White House finally, just dragging bags with dollar signs on them. How does that not annoy them?
Because it's in case he needs it. I mean, it's all the same ongoing grift.
He needed it then.
The guy was president of the United States complaining about how people were mean to him and he was being canceled. He's president of the United States. Like the most powerful person on the planet, pretending that they have no power.
Can I ask you a question? So, this is sort of about the baseball card thing. So he scammed them. He said it was gonna go towards this, it didn't go towards this. I don't have a poll, but I would guess that if you were to ask them how mad they are, I don't think the average level of anger would be very high. So does it matter? Is it still grift if they don't? And again, this is my assumption, but if they don't even care that they're being lied to over and over and over again, is Trump doing anything wrong? I guess this is like sort of a moral thing. What do you think, Brett?
Because he knows better, yes, he's doing something wrong. He's doing something wrong because explicitly he asked for something under false pretenses because he knew he was never gonna do these things with it. So he's doing it wrong. However, I think JR is gonna, he might have mentioned in the morning meeting, but he was like, I feel the same way, which is just like, if you take money from a sucker, they're suckers. Like, what can you do?
Sure.
And they're fine with it. They're fine with the concept that Donald Trump isn't doing the thing that he asks for the money that he might be able to do. But they still love him no matter what and think that he has like a better idea of what to do with that money than anyone.
Yeah.
So
I would just say based on the experience of the last 10 years or so, generally, I mean, don't give money for recounts because they never spend it on the recounts. It's like a law of the universe. They will not spend it on a recount.
Well, ironically,
entire campaign debt or whatever.
Ironically, what ends up happening with some of these recounts, like in Pennsylvania, they basically booted all the voting machines, and they're probably going to replace them with new voting machines. So you're just giving more contracts to voting machine companies. They had to boot them because the people who took possession of those voting machines now have compromised the integrity of the voting machines by having them.
Yeah,
so they have to completely change everything about it. But yeah.
Okay, well, we are running low on time in this first hour, so why don't we jump into our last story? It now feels like forever that Brett Kavanaugh has been on the Supreme Court, but it really wasn't that long ago that we were in the thick of his confirmation battle, trying to figure out if America would pass the incredibly low bar of choosing someone for the court that was not saddled by so many obvious, massive issues lurking in his past. And during that battle, there was an investigation by the FBI. But what was that investigation actually like? How deep was it? Was it designed to actually get us to the truth of who this person was, and was he qualified to be on the Supreme Court? Well, on Wednesday morning, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse's office released a June 30th letter from FBI Assistant Director Jill Tyson. As a result of this release, we've learned that the FBI's supplemental investigation happened at the direction of the White House, that the most relevant of the 4,500 tips the agency received were referred back to White House lawyers in the Trump administration, and that in the days of the follow-up investigation, 10 people were interviewed. It doesn't say this, but other reporting has confirmed that neither Christine Blasey Ford nor Kavanaugh were among those 10 people. And I'm not super obsessed with like true crime podcasts, and I've watched a little bit of like Mayor of Easttown, so I'm not an expert on the procedure, but I think the core people are supposed to be talked to at some point. And so they didn't do that. They collected tips. They didn't look into them. They gave them to the Trump lawyers as if to give them ammunition to then use in the public debates. They didn't talk to the core people. So, I mean, it's not like we have a lot of faith in the process that this is now destroying, but how could one have any faith that they discovered what might actually be lurking out there when they so clearly didn't care about the details?
Yeah, I mean, this story is This story serves to confirm all your suspicions about how seriously they took various things along the way. The FBI is like, well, I don't want to be on the hook for not passing these along, but I'm not really going to look into them very much. They did the fact that the 4,500 most credible tips means one of two things. That one, there were 4,500 tips, and the FBI was like, yeah, these are all germane. They came in the same phone tip line. Yeah. Here, take them. Or there were way more than that, and they passed them along to essentially the group of people who had zero incentive to do anything with them. Yeah. That's depressing. That's sad. In terms of like the grand scope of this story and its ability to change anything about America, I just don't think it can do anything. I don't think it can change anything about America. I think it's sad and continues to jade people throughout this process. But like, yeah, it seems about right. I think in the grand scheme of things, Brett Kavanaugh's appointment to the Brett Kavanaugh's appointment to the Supreme Court is not like huge news if we look back on history, because someone similar with worse allegations is Clarence Thomas.
Sure.
And he's been on the court forever and still continues to wear the robe. And that was
but isn't that kind of one of the reasons that Kavanaugh felt even worse? That it was an opportunity to reflect on apparently how little progress there's been in multiple decades.
I mean, no. I mean, we go back to the Kavanaugh thing. This was never going to be. Kavanaugh's thing was so frustrating because, and it was different from, it was different in my opinion from the Clarence Thomas issue. The Clarence Thomas issue was these two are coworkers at the time, and this guy is doing it now horribly. It sucks. The other one is picturing Brett Kavanaugh's, garden path road to being a Supreme Court justice for life, all the way back to when he was in high school drinking beers with PJ and Squee and doing horrible things at parties. They were separated by decades, like those issues. The big thing that would get me, I think there should still be an investigation to all 4,500 of these tips, and specifically with this in mind. And it's the reason why I compare it to Clarence Thomas is if this behavior continued to at that point where it was close to, like, after he was in the working world and he should have been kicked out of all these opportunities that he had while in the working world, that in his judiciary career arc, that's the part where I'm like, we need to go in there and we could do an inquiry if more of this comes out. So I think people should continue to do it. I don't know what 4,500 tips are. It's just a total number.
It's like talking about space. It becomes a number so large that you can't even conceptualize it. Look, I think we might disagree a little bit about, I don't disagree about pragmatically the fact that they weren't as current affected people. I don't think that morally it should have any effect whatsoever. And one could say that at the very least, a guy that's going to be adjudicating the most important issues of our country lying to our faces about it is also a major cause for concern. And I was watching that happen in real time. Assuming
that's a great point. That's deep. I think that's a better point than anyone.
So
the fact that he's lying at the time. But because you can say there's a difference between a teenager doing something horrible and a 40-year-old man doing something horrible. And him lying to our face is way horrible. If those 4,500 tips end up bearing out that we can prove it, then yes.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, anyway, at least the details are out. We'll see if anything comes of it. This is America. It's 2021, so I doubt anything will, unfortunately. In any event, that is unfortunately all the time we have for our first hour. So thank you to all of those of you watching on our linear audience. For those of you on Twitch and YouTube, we do have more news coming. So we're gonna take a short break, but we'll be back after this. Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Damage Report. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, John Adarola. I'll see you soon.